What is up, Westgrove? This December, we have been going through and looking at some of these Old Testament characters that have just been giants, people like David and Moses. This time, we're going to look at Elijah and his life. Elijah is one of the greatest prophets in the Old Testament. He has done many things. One of the things that he did was he predicted the drought. He told the rain to stop. He also multiplied meals. He raised a child from the dead. But probably the most famous thing that he did was he called down fire from heaven and consumed an entire altar. I think if we could look at those things, any one of those things would be enough for us to say that you're a prophet and that you have done enough to be qualified as a prophet. Well, one of the things that happened in the life of Elijah wasn't the greatest thing. In 1 Kings 19, right after he called down fire from heaven, Jezebel sent a message to Elijah basically telling him to stop or she would kill him. Now, one of the things that happened was Elijah became afraid. You would think that maybe at this point in time, after calling down fire from heaven or raising a kid from the dead or telling the rain to stop or to start, you would have the confidence or that this would be the moment for Elijah to step out and to stand up for God. But we see in verse 3 that he became afraid instead. And when he was afraid, he ran to Beersheba, which was a pretty far run. It was like 100 miles away. So in verse 4, one of the things that he says is, "It is enough now, O Lord. Take away my life, for I am no better than my fathers." You see, Elijah was a man who prayed for the fire to come down from heaven. He prayed for the rain to stop. And right here, he just prayed for his life to end. Well, let's thank God that he didn't listen to that one. I think looking at all the things that Elijah did in his life, we might not be able to relate. I think of people like Elijah in the Old Testament. I think of people like Moses or David as these giants, these people that are so larger than life. But right here, I think this is a moment that we can relate to, maybe more than anything else. I mean, I obviously have never called down fire or told the rain to stop. But there have been moments where I've thought, man, wouldn't it be just better to be in heaven? Wouldn't it be better just, I'm not the qualified one. God, it's so much better for you to use someone else. And this is where Elijah was at. So what does God do with failure? What does God do when you give in to fear? Well, throughout the rest of the chapter, in verses like 11, 12 through 18 or so, God does a couple funny things, I would think. See, because I would expect God to say something, to say, hey, maybe get on your feet, maybe even reprimand a little bit and say, hey, remember, you're a servant of me. And I think the natural thing when we realize that we're living in fear, that we're just at this point where we're saying to God, it's enough. This is enough. I'm done. We think that God's going to get us. But what does God do? God tells Elijah to go. If you read through 1 Kings, which you should, you would know that God told Elijah to go everywhere. He told him to go and do this and do that. When he did all those miracles that we listed, those were commands of God. The one place he went where God never told him to go was Beersheba. But God tells him to go to meet him at Horeb, the mount, and God meets him there. And God tells him after Elijah pours out, he kind of says the same thing twice in the chapter if you read it, that he's alone, that Israel isn't listening, which is typical of Israel. I mean, many of the prophets, they were the voice of God and they weren't listening. So God tells Elijah to go and to meet with Elisha, that next person, that next one. So I want to ask you a question. What's the greatest prophecy ever told? Elijah was a great prophet. He did many things. I think one of the things that I'd want to see when I get to heaven is that scene of the fire coming down. But what's the greatest prophecy ever told? You see, we see a moment right here where Elijah was weak and he was given into fear. Elijah at this moment was human, just like all of us. And as humans, we have a problem, and that's sin. And sometimes we miss the mark. That's the goal, is that we're missing the holiness. We're sinning, we're missing that mark. So Jesus came to meet that need, to give us the ability to be covered by him. So the greatest prophecy ever told is simply the gospel. Romans 3:23, John 3:16, John 14:6, Titus 2:11, Hebrews 10:10, all these verses that state that whosoever should believe in God, that the only way to become holy is through Christ. This is the greatest prophecy ever told, that humanity can be saved. That even in this moment where we're trying to serve God just like Elijah was and we missed that mark, we can be covered by Jesus. So even when the best of us, when we have the best intentions and we fail, Jesus is right there to meet us. I was thinking about the moment, probably the most stressful moment in Jesus' life, and it's in Matthew 26:39, and it says, "My Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you." So at this point, Jesus was praying to God, and he was saying, if there's any way I can avoid this, God, let's try it. But if not, God, it's your will, not my will. Jesus was willing to endure the will of God until the point of death, that perfection. It's something that we could never do. If Elijah couldn't do it, Elijah got to that point where he said, it is enough. And he wanted to die to escape what God had planned for him, yet Jesus was willing to go through until the point of death. And because Jesus was successful at defeating death, Satan, and the curse of sin, we can partake in that righteousness and that holiness. That's such an amazing thing. Elijah had done many things. We had mentioned that he had called down fire from heaven, probably one of my personal favorite things that I'd want to see. He told the rain to stop. He told the rain to start. He raised the kid from the dead. And yet, Satan still knew that he would be gripped by fear. Right in that moment. If the money were on me, if I were to guess, I'd say, no way. Elijah did not just one of those amazing things, but he did like 4 or 5 of them. There's no way he's gonna falter. But Satan knew that. And Satan knows you and me better than we maybe even know ourselves. And so trust in the Lord, hold tightly to Christ. As we go through this season and we celebrate that Jesus has come, know that we are covered in him, and that anyone who is in him, no one can snatch us out. This is the gospel. This is the good news.